Welcome back to another episode of Adam's Fall. Every time I see yet another video about Joseph Smith practicing plural marriage or polygamy, to be honest, I want to vomit. I know it is somewhat ironic because here I am doing a video about this very subject, but it is such a tired discussion and one that I feel cannot be resolved with 100% certainty anyway. We just don't have enough evidence to be absolutely sure. And trying to do history about public figures in the past is very challenging. The most we can often say is that we believe there is a higher probability of one event happening versus another, but none of us were there, and we cannot verify any historical account firsthand. So therefore, history cannot verify whether Joseph Smith practiced polygamy or plural marriage. There really, in my mind, is evidence on both sides. He denied it publicly, but others maintained that he did practice it. It is mostly people that were associated with Joseph Smith, such as other church leaders, that maintained that he did practice plural marriage secretly. What really gets me frustrated about this topic is the insistence by parties on both sides that a historical analysis can give us the truth about this question. My personal take, for what it's worth, is that we don't have enough information to be absolutely conclusive. Sure, there does seem to be a lot of corroborating evidence and testimony that he did secretly practice polygamy, but there is enough ambiguity and there are question marks that leave it open for me that he didn't. Historical analysis is not the same as coming up with truth. History is not science. None of us were there to witness the events. Really, it has just devolved into a tireless internet back and forth, one group of historians or internet critics against another. World history is, of course, replete with groups that maintain narratives. Just because there is a common narrative doesn't mean it is true. It was once believed by almost everybody that the sun revolved around the earth. The fact is, though, that many church leaders practiced polygamy for several decades. This does seem well established to me because there are generations of children that can be well documented. However, there is one major question mark when it comes to Joseph Smith, and that is that Joseph Smith has no documented children. And every person that has maintained that they are a secret descendant of Joseph Smith has later been proven to not be. And Joseph Smith was clearly able to have children, as he had many children with his wife Emma. And so interestingly, the only verifiable fact about this question that can be tested today is that of DNA evidence. As of yet, there has been no child reported to be from Joseph Smith that has been verified by DNA evidence. So this is really the biggest question mark to the official narrative, in addition to the public denials from Joseph Smith, Emma Smith, and Hiram Smith. So just this fact alone will leave the question open for me in perpetuity unless there is DNA evidence of some child. So does this mean that Joseph Smith did not have plural marriages or practice polygamy? No. It could be just a matter of chance that Joseph Smith did not happen to get somebody pregnant, or that a child was had in secret and never revealed to be from Joseph Smith, or that any pregnancies that would have resulted from Joseph Smith's polygamy ended in miscarriage. That being said, there seems to me to be four main theories about Joseph Smith and polygamy or plural marriage. Now, a very common one among ex-Mormon groups and, quote, anti-Mormons is that Joseph Smith just had a high libido. He was the womanizer, and that Joseph Smith just came up with the doctrine of plural marriage because he was just interested in having more sex and could not control his natural urges. He was just trying to hide it and use the doctrine of plural marriage to cover up his tracks after the fact. A second theory that is the more common LDS, quote, Mormon narrative is that Joseph Smith believed in creating eternal connections, something like an eternal human family, and plural marriage was a way to make this concrete. He then had plural wives, but sex was not always a major part of it. The fact that sex was not a major part of it is supported by the fact that we have no documented children from these, quote, plural marriages. This theory is mostly supported by the testimony of others. These testimonies come from people associated with Joseph Smith and other prominent church leaders such as Brigham Young. A common part of this narrative is that Joseph Smith was reluctant to disclose this practice because of the fear of persecution. He was also perhaps worried about the repercussions for his marriage and for the church community at large. I think a driving force for this narrative is the desire to have a common narrative that unites Joseph Smith with Brigham Young and future leaders who clearly supported polygamy and were insistent that Joseph Smith instilled it. It is perhaps disheartening for some to countenance the fact that there may have been some significant differences between Joseph Smith's vision and Brigham Young's or other church leaders. There is definitely a drive to have a faithful, common narrative that supports the early practice. Having a common narrative that Joseph Smith started polygamy also helps instill confidence in the prophetic role and that prophets can be relied on. A third theory is that Joseph Smith believed in creating eternal connections, something like an eternal human family, and that, quote, sealings was the way to make this concrete, but that actual full marriage that included a sexual component was never a part of it. A part of this narrative is that Joseph Smith told the truth and was monogamous, and polygamy was instituted by his subsequent followers like Brigham Young, who turned sealings into full marriage on earth. And some people that hold this view believe that Brigham Young used Joseph Smith's credibility as the founding prophet in order to establish veracity for his practice of polygamy. And I think this view can be established by the available historical evidence if we take into account that Joseph Smith has no documented children and the repeated public denials by Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith of the practice. We can also take a look at Emma Smith's testimony that Joseph Smith was not involved in polygamy. And this view would have to subjugate all the personal testimonies from other church leaders and women who claimed to be Joseph Smith's plural wives. A fourth view is that Joseph Smith did tell the truth. He did not practice polygamy, and he was monogamous, in that neither sealings nor plural marriage were part of Joseph Smith's vision. This view would hold that any idea of an expanded human family, quote, sealed together in some sense, either through plural marriage or sealing ordinances, did not come from Joseph Smith and were later inventions by Brigham Young and other leaders. I personally feel that this view is less likely based on the historical evidence. For me at this point in my life, am I consumed with the question of whether Joseph Smith practiced polygamy? Are there not more important questions, like how we can learn to come to Christ and be disciples of Him? The fact is, the church did practice polygamy. This is not disputed. None of us are able to go back and see the complex workings of how this doctrine unfolded. So it is my hope that people from all sides on this issue can exercise a little epistemic humility, realizing that they cannot establish the truth definitively in their favor. Hopefully we can just come together and focus on those things of greatest importance in our lives today. I look forward to your comments and suggestions on this tough and tricky issue. Until the next video.